What does it mean to be a shotgun rider in pastoral ministry? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Welcome, friends. This is David Schnitker with another Last Days Beacon podcast. Thanks for joining us. Today we have a very special guest in studio. Doug Brown is the pastor of family ministries at Metropolitan Bible Church in Oklahoma City. I've had the privilege of getting to know Pastor Doug over the last 6 years with my return to Oklahoma City and renewed attendance at my home church. For the last 30 years or so, Pastor Doug has served youth and their families in pastoral ministry. In addition to that, Doug has written a very helpful book for those serving as associate pastors in local churches. The book has an intriguing title. It is called Shotgun Rider: Restoring Your Passion for the Ministry Trail. We're going to be talking about Doug's experiences as an associate pastor and the valuable content that he has packed into this book. Well, Pastor Doug, thank you for joining me in studio today.
Thank you, David. I'm glad to be here. This is going to be an encouraging conversation.
Well, I've been looking forward to it as well. I think we're going to be getting into some very interesting experiences. This is a copy of the book. I have perused it in the past, but actually I reread it last night and this morning. So, and it is a very encouraging book. I can tell it was written from the heart, from the experiences that you've had, some of which have been difficult experiences. Yes. And I appreciate your transparency in sharing those. Perhaps some pastors with less humility would not have dealt with some of the difficult times in the pastorate. And as a veteran of 25 years of pastoral ministry, I can attest also that there are difficult times, that being a shotgun rider is sometimes a bit hazardous. You get shot at.
Yes.
And oftentimes you get overlooked when it comes to, how should we say, the kudos. But when the problems are there, you're often not overlooked. And sometimes, to be honest, sometimes you're in the business of cleaning up messes.
That's right.
And it requires a humility and a steadfastness of character. So for our listeners, why don't you share something about your background, your training, your ministry experience, and then, of course, we want to know what your website is also.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been an associate pastor for over 30 years in 4 different churches. And that included a lot of great ministry experiences. God has led us and brought us into some pretty significant ministry opportunities in those churches. But as well, there has been some conflict that I've been called to deal with and have been a part of, which you had mentioned in part that is contained in my book and that I shared fairly openly. And that's part of the picture. And so a lot of these experiences is what led me to write the book and also to create my website, which is shotgunride.com. So if listeners, viewers want to go there and do further reading, there's some interesting articles there, and it's shotgunride.com. And you can also get there by typing my name, K. Douglas Brown. Either way will get you there.
Great. Well, why did you decide to write the book? You're a busy associate pastor at Metropolitan, many ministries that you oversee, a lot of people who are depending upon your leadership. So I'm sure the hours are long and there's never a lack of things to do. So why did you write the book and why did you decide to call it Shotgun Rider?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. You know, I'd been through some pretty difficult times and then came into my most recent ministry here in Oklahoma City, and things were very peaceful, and different situations came up that caused me to think about some of these past experiences I'd had. And so I began to just jot down some thoughts and just writing what I thought originally were going to be a series of articles. And before long, I realized that what I was writing was really more to be a book. And so that's kind of how the book came about. And what really started, though, the process of this idea of the shotgun rider was, we as a family would go through our routine Wednesday night experience. I'd get out in the car, be waiting for the kids to come out the door. And on one particular Wednesday, I was in the car waiting and kept looking over my shoulder for the kids to come out the door. And I heard my older two come out the door, and as they came out, they were bantering back and forth, arguing about who was going to ride shotgun. And one of them said, I call shotgun, which is a fun game that kids play, who gets to ride up front and next to the driver. And then the other one said, no, I get to ride shotgun. You rode last time. And they went back and forth. And finally, I had to put it to an end, and I just turned and with one question ended the discussion. And I said, who rode up front last time? Well, that decided whose turn it was to ride up front. And then just before we pulled out of the driveway, I remember just taking a moment and pausing and thinking, this is me. I've been the shotgun rider for nearly 25 years at that time. And I've loved every minute of the ministry, even through the difficult times. Following God's leading. It's been quite a journey, and I just remember thinking, this is me. I'm the shotgun rider, and I love it, and I would fight to have that seat again.
It's interesting. I have probably 2 or 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 books. It's that. My background is pastoral training, and I have some seminary work. And along the way, you pick up books on how to be a pastor. And I think without exception, every book, some were assigned in pastoral theology classes, get a book, by Dwight Pentecost or Gordon MacDonald. It's always about being a senior pastor.
Yeah.
I think this is the first book that I have ever received or read that has to do with being the associate pastor. And some have compared being an associate pastor with being a second fiddle.
Yeah.
And who wants to be a second fiddle? I mean, that's
right.
kind of a pejorative
second
statement.
Best. Yeah.
Second best, right. And also ran. So this is perhaps not the first book that's ever been written on being an associate pastor, but it's definitely it's a rare commodity. And I wonder how many people, just off the cuff, when they're going through Bible college or seminary, have as their ambition being an associate pastor.
Yes.
I know the classmates that I had at Moody, and we're both graduates of Moody.
Yes.
And I was in the pastoral training major. I think all of my classmates in that major aspired to be a senior pastor.
Yeah.
It really wasn't even on our radar that we would be anything but that.
Yes.
But wouldn't you say, and I know you've got the statistics to bear this out, aren't there more associate pastors in America?
Oh, yes, by far.
Than there are senior pastors?
That's true, by far. I did the study about the time that I was going into some promotion work on the book, and by my estimations, after looking at the Pew Research and the Hartford study, you can get some pretty accurate figures there. There are people out there counting senior pastors, but not too many are paying attention to the over 600,000 associate pastors.
That's over 500,000.
It's over 500,000.
And that's just in the United States?
In the U.S. It doesn't count Canada and Europe and other places. Yeah.
And when I was going through Moody, to be honest, the training was all geared toward being the senior pastor.
Yes.
I had multiple courses in homiletics, which of course is the science and art of preaching, and of course multiple courses in Greek and Bible and Bible theology. And in my mind, everything was geared toward preparing me to be a senior pastor. But in my 25 years of pastoral ministries, for 21 of those years, I was an associate pastor.
Yeah.
I never had any training for this, but that's what, in the providence of God, I ended up being.
Yeah.
And it is a different animal, isn't it?
It is. It's very different. How you approach ministry is different. When you don't have the natural platform of being a senior pastor, you have to earn those stripes through your relationships with people. And it is a different animal.
Truly is. So as you wrote this book, based upon now 30 years of experience, what was going through your mind in terms of what should I include in this book that will help other associate pastors?
Yeah, well, one of the things right off the bat that I wanted to include in the book, and I debated whether or not I should include it, was a very difficult situation that I went through at one church. And it's kind of difficult to talk about, but in that church there were some very serious issues going on that I was unaware of, and in the end it cost me my employment. Which I realized, looking back as I was writing the book, that this was one of the things that had shaped me as a believer, and it shaped my view of the church. It shaped how I perceived God viewed the church. It changed how I viewed ministry and people in the church, and those lessons in my life were so valuable that I came to a point where I decided I'm going to include this in my book, though some would say that's career suicide, to sort of air your own dirty laundry, in a sense. But I decided those are so helpful because it's reality. And I've gotten so many comments from people who've read the book, and it just opened their eyes to the fact that this is how it really is, that there are difficult times in ministry, and we need to tell young folks going through college, studying for the ministry, that this is part of it. And Scripture bears that out, that we should expect difficult times in the church. And I know we're going to talk about that in another segment, but I think it's just important to address issues of ministry as they really are.
I think a lot of people, young people going through Bible college or seminary, aspiring toward pastoral ministry, have rose-colored glasses.
Yes.
They think, well, when I become a pastor, I'm going to be universally respected. People will confide their deepest problems in me and expect, wise answers. I will be looked up to. I will finally get some respect, as Rodney Dangerfield never had, once I become a pastor. And for many, it's very eye-opening that just because you've graduated from Bible college or seminary, just because you are ordained and can wear legally the reverend or pastoral title, that you are automatically going to get respect and submission and trust. And I think my cynical experience is that sometimes you become a target for the exact opposite.
That's right.
There are some people who have, for whatever reason, have problems with authority. And let's be honest, there are some people, including Christians, who are mad at God. And you become identified with God.
That's
so if
right.
they're mad at God, who are they going to take it out on?
That's right. And so often in ministry, we talk about this, how when you're in the pastorate or in ministry, even volunteering, you're on the front lines of ministry. And who does the evil one want to target? He wants to take down those who are on the front lines, so that he can wreak the most destruction. Right.
Now, as I recall, Jesus in his last commission, his Great Commission, he gave that commission to the church.
Yes.
So what organization or institution would Satan most want to target to prevent the Great Commission from being fulfilled? The church.
That's right.
So who has the target on the back? Church leadership.
That's right. The
pastors and associate pastors as well.
Sometimes I think that people in the church have this attitude, not my church. Those things don't happen in my church. Somehow my church is special. Well, if you think about it, if your church really is special and God's doing a wonderful work in your church, and I hope that He is, then your church becomes the very target that the evil one wants to take down. So the very churches we say, not my church, those are the ones that he would like to destroy the most.
Absolutely. Well, I will confess that chapter 7, which is the chapter where you deal with your unplanned departure, was the most encouraging to me because I had an unplanned departure from a church and likewise an 18-month hiatus between pastoral ministries where I was doing some of the same kinds of things you were doing, painting.
Yes.
I was mowing lawns. I was doing door-to-door sales. It was the most discouraging time in my life. And God really did some things in my heart and life as a result of that, that has changed my attitude. But it was a very difficult time. And I can tell you, of the different books that I've read by senior pastors, about senior pastors, none of them talk about the difficult times.
Yeah.
It's all glowing, all-star reviews by prominent, well-known names within pastoral circles, and you never hear the dark side.
Right.
So in my view, you're including your difficult time in ministry could perhaps be that word of encouragement that associate pastor needs.
Yes.
I saw an article in Leadership magazine some years ago that was kind of startling. It gave the average tenure of pastors in the United States. And if I recall this correctly, the average senior pastor lasts about 3.5 years.
I believe that's right.
The average associate pastor lasts about 2.5 years.
Yes, that should tell you something.
And then worst of all, the average youth pastor lasts about 1.5 years. So if young people going into the ministry are not aware of the dangers and the sometimes forced transitions that are part and parcel of modern pastoral ministry, they're going to be very disillusioned and discouraged and may drop out altogether.
Yes.
I heard a story about a pastor who became so discouraged in ministry that he put all of his books in the back of his pickup truck and went to the city dump and just unloaded them. And he was done with ministry.
He was done.
At that point, it's like, I'm done. And I'm sure that there are many other stories that could be told.
Yeah.
So I think your book does a service because you kind of pull back the covers a little bit and say, you know, as wonderful and as great a privilege as pastoral ministry is, there are difficult times.
Yes.
And don't think you're not a target.
That's right. You know, I think every seminary, every Bible college in America would do the ministry a favor if they would just have one class on conflict in ministry.
Absolutely.
But it's so rare and it's so needed.
Right.
It should be expected by anyone going into the ministry that there will be conflict.
I have a bachelor's degree in pastoral training. I have 3 seminary degrees. I've never had a course or a session on conflict resolution in the ministry.
Yeah.
It's the dark underbelly of Christian ministry, pastoral ministry, and they don't deal with it.
Yeah.
They don't touch it.
Yeah.
Oh, I know how to exegete a Greek verb. I know the Hebrew stems. You know, I know all the theological positions, or at least I maybe used to. But conflict resolution,
Yeah.
boy, we don't talk about that.
My own total educational experience in dealing with conflict was a 90-minute seminar that I paid to go to long after I was out of seminary and Bible college. But boy, it was so helpful. I wish I'd had that years earlier.
Oh, absolutely, right. Well, we're at about the halfway mark, and we're going to take a brief time out, friends, to hear from a brand new sponsor of our podcast. So stay tuned. We have been producing weekly video podcasts for almost 4 years now, thanks to your generous support. While that support is still vital, the Lord has provided a commercial sponsor to pick up some of those costs. Our new sponsor is Jingoes. Jingoes is an ultra stain remover and odor eliminator. It attacks organic stains and odors. It is environmentally and user-friendly. One satisfied customer writes, "Jingoes works great. I highly suggest picking up this item over anything else you find in the store. It uses natural enzymes versus the harsh chemicals contained in products such as Resolve. I used it on where my dog urinated on the carpet, and you cannot even tell she went. Nice, fresh scent, and just smells like a clean carpet. Nothing chemically and no ammonia smell." That's Aaron from Texas. Thank you, Aaron. Stay tuned, please, for more details.
Hi, Jingoes. It's amazingly fresh and clean out here in beautiful New Zealand. G'day, America. I'm Tabi, and I want to tell you about my new ultimate stain and odour remover, Jingoes. My Jingoes gunk gobblers will tackle stubborn organic stains and eliminate nasty stinking odours at the same time. Jingoes effectively removes those little accidents like wine, coffee, dirt, blood, grass, even pet stains, and odours like fish, garlic, even skunk. Jingo's is environmentally friendly, safe for use on fabrics, carpet, upholstery, and it works great as a laundry pre-soak on the worst pet or people accidents. Come on, America, what are you waiting for? Just go online and order your Jingos for $12.95 and get a 4-ounce travel pack free. Crikey, pay $19.95 and I'll double your order. That's 2 large Jingos and 2 travel packs for just $19.95. Blasted seagulls, where's my Jingos?
We are back now with Doug Brown, pastor of Family Ministries at Metropolitan Bible Church, and author of the book Shotgun Rider, Restoring Your Passion for the Ministry Trail. We've had an interesting discussion so far. We're going to pick up with that and ask the next question. Now, obviously, this book is written for associate pastors, but our hope is that there will be listeners, parishioners as we call them, who will want this book themselves. So how will, Doug, how will this book help parishioners understand and support the unique role of associate pastors?
Well, I think one of the helpful things, and this is one of the comments that I hear often, is that it deals with the reality of ministry, deals with things as they are, not as we would always like them to be, but it deals with some of the hard realities from my own experience. And I think people find that very helpful. Pastors and even Christian leaders find this very helpful.
Now you have some great reviews of the book, people in ministry. And why don't you share a couple of the comments that are written by ministry associates about your book?
Okay. Yes, I have several people that have made comments about this book. One is Dr. Gary Chapman, who wrote the Love Languages book. He's a friend of mine, and I've gotten to know him. And many people don't know this about Dr. Chapman, but he was an associate minister for his entire career while he wrote the Love Languages book. And he said, and I put it on the front of the book, I have never read anything more helpful. And he commented that this was indeed a rare find in the book world for somebody to write on issues facing associate pastors. Another one from a friend of mine, Eric Venable. The lightning that will strike from this read is not a new program or a strategy toward your church or staff. More beneficial is when God allows lightning to strike the core of your identity and calling. This is where passion is restored. And I appreciate some of these comments. Another one from Dr. Mark Jobe, now the president at Moody Bible Institute. Shotgun Rider will challenge you to embrace the significance of your role and to keep your heart in the right place in spite of your circumstances. I think that's a good description as well.
I'd like to quote from the book because I think it summarizes the spirit of your whole approach to pastoral ministry. You know, there are some books in pastoral ministry, and I'm sure you've read them, that give the nuts and bolts. You know, how to prepare your Sunday morning sermon.
The mechanics.
The mechanics of it. Yeah, I've got thick books on the mechanics of pastoral ministry. And from a technical point of view, it's helpful, you know, how to organize your week, how to engage in pastoral counseling, how to do visitation. In other words, how to juggle the plates that pastors are supposed to juggle, especially if you're a solo pastor.
Yes.
And in all of that, we can lose the wonder of it all. We can lose the very motivation of God's grace that led us into the pastorate to start with. We can lose that connection with our calling.
That's right.
And I think one of the themes that I saw repeatedly in your book is this urging of those in pastoral ministry to remember your calling.
Yeah.
Why did you, were you sober when you did this? Why in the world did you decide to do this? What was it that ignited your soul, that compelled you to do this? Hopefully the compulsion of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And a sense of joy of doing the Lord's work and using your gifts to the glory of God. And so I saw that theme throughout this book, and I thought you did a great job of summarizing it in your last chapter, which is a good place to summarize. We're on page 155, you say, we must never forget that the foundation of ministry is the idea that God extended His grace to us.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a foundation.
We got to start with that. It's the grace of God that brings salvation. Titus 2:11. He gave His life for us by providing His precious Son to die in our place so we can live. It is out of appreciation for that gift that we serve Him. That's really simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why do we serve as associate pastors or senior pastors? Out of appreciation for His precious gift. And it is in this service, this holy assignment, that we are reminded that He has called imperfect, sinful people to be used to build His kingdom. It is this very attitude extended to us, that selfless love for others, which we extend to those around us. Yes, grace is the vehicle by which we are saved, and we must pass grace along to others in that same spirit of grace as we love them, lead them, and build them.
Yes.
It's a grace-based motivation for ministry.
That's right. This is so key to my philosophy of ministry, and I believe yours as well, that it's the grace of God that forms the foundation for all of the Christian life. We tend to do this thing where we enter the Christian life accepting grace, and then we go on and act as if it has nothing to do with the rest of the Christian life or of our leadership. And it's important to remember that that is the foundation, and it should bear the character of our ministry.
I think of Titus 2:11, which I partially quoted. It says, "The grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age."
Yes.
So the foundation, not only of our salvation, but the foundation for our service is the grace of God.
That's right.
You know, some people have this fallacious attitude that, well, we were saved by the grace of God, but then we have to perform good works in order to stay saved,
Yeah.
As if God is an Indian giver. But Paul here in Titus 2 connects grace not only with salvation, but with service. The same grace that saves is the grace that motivates us to serve.
That's right. That's right. And that's something that's true not just for ministers. I want to be clear about this idea that this grace motivation should motivate all of us. Now, it has its unique characteristics for those in ministry, but this is a foundation of faith for every believer.
Yeah, again, it's easy for believers, whether they're professionals or just regular folks that come to church on Sunday and want to serve, is that we don't serve out of obligation. We serve as a privilege.
Yes.
And Paul reflected that attitude in many places. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4. It's a merciful thing that we're called to ministry. It's because of God's mercy.
Yeah.
It's not because we're obligated. It's not because God will not love us if we don't perform at a certain level.
Yeah.
When we get into that works mentality, either as a layperson or as a pastor, eventually it's like the air that goes out of the tire. Eventually all the joy is gone.
Yes.
And we just do it to earn a paycheck or to stay out of trouble with the big guy, not the Lord, but the senior pastor.
Yeah.
And we just do it as a drudgery.
Yeah.
And we've lost the connection with the grace of God.
Yeah. And there are those in ministry who have this wrong perspective that God needed their gifts and abilities. We need to remember that grace is a free gift, and His choice to use us in ministry is also a free choice. And sometimes we need to be reminded that He doesn't need our strengths as much as we might think He does. He could just as well call someone else into ministry. And that's, I think, an important thing to remember, that we serve in ministry and whatever He's called us to do, whether it's in the pastorate or whether it's in vocational service or volunteering in a local church or other ministry, that God brings us into that based on His grace.
I think another trap that you kind of touch on throughout the book, and particularly in chapter 7, where you deal with the 18 months between ministry and the struggles that you had with that, is kind of a performance mentality. Now, maybe you've had this experience. I have, when you go to pastoral meetings and you're chumming it up with other pastors at lunch or etc., and inevitably the question comes up, well, how big is your church?
Yeah.
And And usually that's measured in buildings, budgets, or baptisms,
Yeah.
i.e. nickels and noses. And maybe I'm the only one, but when you're in those kinds of fellowships, a pecking order kind of emerges. The pastor of the biggest church becomes the most important guy.
That's right.
The senior guy of the mega church is really at the top of the pyramid. And then when you get to the bottom of the pyramid, you got the youth pastor of a small church, or a children's pastor. I mean, that's the bottom, the very bottom of the pyramid in a lot of these things. And I guess to me, there's a focus on externality, that your success is measured in buildings, budgets, and baptisms.
Yeah.
And the reality is, though we all want to be, quote, successful at a measurable level, sometimes God calls us into ministries that aren't necessarily growing, like the struggle you had as a youth pastor, when some in leadership didn't feel like the youth group was growing as fast as they wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And they were only applying an external measure. And the recognition that sometimes in ministry, the growth is not always measured by externals, but internals.
That's right. And we can't always see what God is doing in the background, and who He's bringing to Himself and how He's using us. It's usually in unexpected ways. I had a circumstance, a situation that really brought this home at a point where I thought I was at the peak of my career. I went on a mission trip to India, and I was there as the expert. I was there to bring some lessons for some youth and children's workers who worked out in jungle villages and remote places. And I mean, I kind of came with this perspective that I'm the expert bringing something to these folks. And when I got there, I had learned that some of them, many of them, had walked several days on foot to get to this seminar, just so that they could gain a little bit of help with their Christian education in their churches. And when I met those folks, I realized these are the real heroes. These are the folks that God is going to really bless when we get to heaven. I think they're the ones who are going to live in mansions. And sometimes the things that we register, the things that we count as the pecking order here on earth, I get the feeling it's going to be reversed in heaven. And
well,
some
didn't
of those,
Jesus say that the first shall be last and the last shall be first?
Seems like I've heard that somewhere.
I think God's going to reverse the pecking order. And some of these folks that we think are so lowly and so unsuccessful, minister in obscurity, I think those are going to be on the front row in heaven.
Yeah.
And some of the proud, well-known megachurch senior pastors may be on the back row.
Yeah.
God's order is different than our order. What we consider important and what God considers important are most of the times diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
So our measures are not God's measures. And I think that's helpful for people, maybe someone listening, struggling in ministry. It's like, my church isn't growing.
Yeah.
Am I a failure? No, not necessarily.
That's one of the benefits of staying with ministry for a long time. And as you look back, you see situations that you never thought God was going to work, or He wasn't, involved in someone's life, but you kind of hung in there with those folks and tried to encourage them and disciple them. And then later, when you look back, you realize that God was at work all along. And you don't see that in the short term. That's not a flash in the pan.
Right.
That's something that's there because you were faithful and you obeyed God even when it didn't seem like there were results.
And that tends to run counter to the American success mentality. Yeah. I think some of these statistics I gave in terms of brief tenures is because pastors become impatient.
Yes.
They don't see the results that they think they deserve, so they want to move up the ladder to the bigger church, the bigger paycheck, the greater esteem and notice. And maybe God wants them to just stay and grow in their faithfulness and see the life change. So I think some of this emphasis in terms of ministering out of the grace of God has to do with a patient perspective.
Yeah.
And it's like, ministry is not all about me.
That's right.
It's about what God wants to do in the fellowship that He's called me to.
Yeah.
And that's kind of not something you see in American pastoral conferences.
That's
too
right.
much.
That's right. Yeah, we never go to pastoral conferences, and the pastor of the small church is leading the conference.
Right.
It's always the mega church, and
Right.
sometimes I think we miss out on some needed biblical perspective from those who are just in the trenches.
Absolutely. Well, you know, Doug, Pastor's Appreciation Month is coming up in October, just a
Yes.
few short months away. And I believe that this would make a perfect gift for the associate pastor in the life of our listener. How would our listeners obtain a copy of your book?
It's available on Amazon.com. And if viewers want to purchase a copy for someone in ministry they know, they can go to Amazon Books and type in the field Shotgun Rider and my name, K. Douglas Brown, and the book will come up there on Amazon.com.
That's wonderful. And we're going to have the stream of that information also with the end of the podcast. Well, Doug, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, David.
And next week, Doug will be back as we are going to shift gears toward a discussion of the dark side of Christian ministry. We will be discussing the topic of corruption in evangelical Christian leadership. This is also part of the package of pastoral leadership and church matters in America. So we're going to deal with that. This is a discussion that you will not want to miss. So friends, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week for another Last Days Beacon program brought to you by Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Until then, keep occupying until He comes.